This morning, the Kuwaiti supertanker al-Salmi loaded to the brim with 2 million barrels of crude oil. That's a cargo worth over $200 million. Just so you grasp the scale, caught fire 31 nautical miles off Dubai. The vessel was struck 31 nautical miles northwest of Dubai, according to the UK Maritime Trade Operations, UKMTO. Pause for a second. Dubai. Not some godforsaken spot in the open ocean. Dubai, the showcase of global capital, a shipping hub, the place where the wealthiest people on the planet park their money in real estate. And right off its coast, an oil tanker is burning. The strike on al-Salmi is just the latest in a series of attacks on commercial vessels by missiles or explosive air and sea drones in the Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz since the US and Israeli strikes on Iran on February 28th. This is not an isolated incident. This is a systematic deconstruction of the maritime security framework that has underpinned global trade for the past 50 years. The strike on the tanker demonstrates a fundamental shift in the nature of conflict. Energy infrastructure has become the primary battlefield. The world you woke up in today is no longer the world that existed yesterday. Let's break down why. Here's the chain of facts, numbered, verified, emotion-free. Fact number 1. The Strait of Hormuz, the critical choke point of global energy trade, has been in a state of continuous disruption since February 28, 2026, following joint U.S.-Israeli military strikes on Iran. Fact number 2. Brent crude prices broke through the $100 per barrel mark on March 8, 2026, for the first time in 4 years, reaching a peak of $126. The closure of the strait has been described as the largest energy supply disruption since the 1970s energy crisis and the largest in the history of the global oil market. Fact number 3. Price dynamics over the past month laid out clearly. Brent futures surged 36% from February 27th, the last trading day before the war, to March 27th, when they traded above $113 per barrel. But the Dubai benchmark, which tracks the physical delivery of oil from Middle Eastern sellers, jumped 76%, more than double the paper price, to $126. As of March 30th, $111.10 per barrel, which is $37.69 higher than a year ago. Fact number 4. The average U.S. retail gasoline price broke through $4 per gallon for the first time in more than 3 years, while U.S. crude oil prices exceeded $101 per barrel. Fact number 5. According to IEA estimates, global oil supply dropped by 8 million barrels per day in March, and more than 3 million barrels per day of refining capacity in the region has already been shut down due to attacks and the lack of viable export routes. Fact number 6, and the most terrifying number. A CLR analyst stated on CNN, 260 million barrels have disappeared from the market. These are barrels that were never produced, adding, if this conflict lasts through the end of April, by our calculations, losses will reach 570 million barrels. Recovery will be incredibly difficult. Now let's look at the industrial logic of this conflict. Iran uses drones and missiles to attack vessels. Dubai authorities later reported they brought the fire under control after a drone attack on the tanker. This isn't a cruise missile costing millions. It's a drone. A single drone estimated at between $20,000 and $100,000 set ablaze a vessel carrying $200+ million in cargo. The asymmetry is staggering. Iran isn't competing with the American fleet ship against ship. It's competing drone against tanker. And it's winning, not militarily, but economically. Look at insurance rates. This is where the math of attrition becomes crystal clear. As Lloyd's List financial editor David Osler put it, before hostilities, typical rates for the Strait of Hormuz were 0.15% to 0.25% of hull value for a one-week policy. Since the conflict began, quotes have reached 5% to 10% of hull value. For a supertanker valued at roughly 100 million euros, that means several million euros in additional costs for a single transit. P&I mutual insurance clubs, all 12 members of the international group of P&I clubs, covering 90% of global ocean tonnage, have issued notices canceling portions of war risk coverage in the Gulf. Effectively, vessels wishing to transit the Strait of Hormuz are finding it nearly impossible to obtain whole war risk insurance. And now, the key point. The U.S. announced a $20 billion reinsurance program to restart shipping through Hormuz. $20 billion. That's the price tag for a drone costing a few $1,000s launched from the Iranian coast. Now the main question, what does this have to do with me? I don't live in Dubai or Tehran or Washington. Here's the chain from tanker to refrigerator. 1. Gasoline and transportation. Rising oil and fuel prices have begun squeezing American households and have turned into a political headache for Trump and his Republican Party ahead of the November midterm elections. Gas at $4 plus per gallon in the US, but this affects everyone. In Europe, Asia, Africa proportionally. 2. Fertilizers and food. This vital waterway typically carries 1/5 of the world's oil shipments and nearly 1/3 of global fertilizer trade. Restricted fertilizer availability and trade threatens agriculture and food security worldwide. Spring planting is happening right now. Iran agreed to a UN request to allow humanitarian and fertilizer cargoes through the strait on March 27th to address fertilizer supply disruptions during planting season. The mere fact that a UN resolution was needed for this tells you everything. 3. Petrochemicals and shortages. The collapse of LPG and naphtha supplies is already forcing petrochemical plants to cut polymer production, compounding the loss of petrochemical product flows from the Gulf. Polymers are plastic. Plastic is packaging, pipes, medical equipment, auto parts. Absolutely everything. 4. Aluminum, helium, fertilizers. Other commodity markets hit by price spikes as a result of the crisis include aluminum, fertilizers, and helium. Helium isn't just for party balloons. It's for cooling MRI machines, manufacturing fiber optics, and producing semiconductors. 5. LPG and electricity. The use of liquefied gas for cooking and heating, especially in India and East Africa, is also under threat. For Europe, the situation is no better. The attacks are putting additional pressure on energy supplies for the 27 EU countries that depend on imported natural gas to power factories, generate electricity, and heat homes. 6. Mortgages and inflation. Oil at $111 plus is fuel for inflation. Inflation means rate hikes. Rate hikes mean your mortgage payment, your car loan, your consumer credit. U.S. government debt is suddenly attracting less demand, even as $10 trillion needs to be refinanced this year against the backdrop of a war with Iran. And here's where it gets truly terrifying, because Hormuz is only half the problem. On March 28th, the Houthis resumed attacks on Israel in the context of the 2026 war with Iran. Why is this critical? Because after the closure of Hormuz, the world found a workaround since the Strait of Hormuz was closed. Saudi Arabia had been shipping millions of barrels of oil per day through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait at the southern tip of the Arabian Peninsula. And now that workaround is also in the crosshairs. The Houthis' entry could further devastate global shipping if they resume attacking vessels in the Bab el-Mandeb Strait near the Red Sea, through which roughly 12% of global trade normally passes. Picture this on a map. The escalating conflict critically threatens two key maritime choke points: the Red Sea and its southern entrance, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, and the Strait of Hormuz in the Persian Gulf. Bab el-Mandeb is the key route for cargo headed to the Suez Canal. Hormuz handles roughly 1/5 of the world's oil and LNG shipments. Both are vulnerable to missile and drone attacks. If both straits are blocked simultaneously, the only remaining route is around the Cape of Good Hope. This forces shipping companies to route vessels around the Cape of Good Hope, as they did in 2024 and 2025, significantly increasing costs. 2 to 3 weeks are added to every voyage. Every week means millions in fuel, crew wages, and lost contracts. This is a double lock on global trade. This has never happened before. Against the backdrop of chaos, key players are already restructuring their logistics. China is operating on its own logic. 2 container ships belonging to the Chinese giant COSCO successfully transited the Strait of Hormuz and exited the Gulf. These are the CSCL Indian Ocean and CSCL Arctic Ocean, which passed near the Iranian-controlled island of Larak en route to Port Klang, Malaysia. On March 26th, Iran's foreign minister announced that vessels from 5 countries, China, Russia, India, Iraq, and Pakistan, would be granted passage through the Strait of Hormuz. Malaysia and Thailand were also given access. And here's the new reality. Iranian officials stated they would charge fees for the safe passage of certain tankers through the strait. These statements followed reports by Lloyd's List Intelligence on March 23rd that at least 2 vessels had paid large sums for transit. Iran is already collecting fees in yuan for oil passing through the strait. Iran has effectively privatized an international waterway. It's collecting tribute in yuan, not dollars. This isn't just a military operation. This is a recalibration of the financial architecture. The U.S. is trying to compensate. The U.S. announced a $20 billion reinsurance program to restore shipping through Hormuz. But Trump's push to enlist allies in securing the strait has been met with reluctance. And on the ground, a force buildup, including 2 Marine Expeditionary Units already en route to the Persian Gulf, could place between 6,000 and 8,000 U.S. ground troops in immediate proximity to Iran. A potential mission may involve the Iranian island of Karg, a small piece of land in the Persian Gulf through which 90% of Iran's oil exports flow. So where does this lead? 3 options. Scenario 1, the dirty deal, de-escalation by mid-April. The Wall Street Journal reports that Trump told aides he is prepared to end the military campaign even if the strait remains largely closed, and to defer the complex operation of reopening it to a later date. Both sides are exhausted. Iran gets partial relief from pressure. The U.S. declares victory, oil prices retreat to $90 to $95. Wallets get a few months of breathing room, but Hormuz remains a problem for years. Global trade adapts through alternative routes. Slow, expensive, but no catastrophe. Scenario 2, Karg escalation with a limited ground operation. Trump told the Financial Times that he wants to take the oil in Iran and may seize the Karg export hub. Oil executives and analysts warn that the Strait of Hormuz must be reopened by mid-April, or oil supply disruptions will become significantly worse. If that doesn't happen, a landing on Karg becomes a reality. Oil skyrockets to $130 to $150. Inflation spirals worldwide. A recession in Europe becomes inevitable. Your electricity and food bills jump 20 to 30%. Scenario 3, the spiral, the one nobody wants to say out loud. Continued strikes and counterstrikes on oil refineries, pipelines, gas fields, and tanker terminals in the Persian Gulf threaten to extend global economic pain for months, if not years. The Houthis block Bab el-Mandeb. Iran destroys Saudi infrastructure. Both maritime straits are sealed. The IEA has already cut its forecast for global oil demand growth by 210,000 barrels per day. Under a double lock, the conversation shifts from rising prices to physical shortages, fuel rationing, factory shutdowns, a food crisis in Africa and South Asia. This is 1973 on steroids and with drones. A burning tanker off the coast of Dubai is not just a news story. It's a marker, a signal that the security architecture on which global trade has been built for the past half-century is burning alongside the al-Salmi. Every drone that hits a tanker in the Gulf, every missile that forces a reinsurer to bump premiums by 0.5%, all of it reaches your wallet. Through gasoline, through food, through your mortgage, through the lights in your apartment. Watch 2 dates. April 6th, Trump's deadline for Iran to reopen Hormuz, and mid-April, the point after which, according to analysts, the oil crisis becomes irreversible. The world right now is a clock ticking in reverse, and the hands are accelerating.